Welcome to Cura Talks, a podcast by Cura Health that brings you thoughtful conversations with healthcare professionals across Kuwait. From wellness myths to modern medicine, each episode gives you the insight and clarity you need to better understand your health and your choices. Joining us today is Lulwa Al Armali, a functional nutritionist who focuses on root causes, personalized care, and sensible nutrition strategies that work with the body, not against it. We're unpacking functional nutrition, busting myths, and exploring how we can eat with intention and health year round. Lulwa, welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So, before we delve into the good stuff, for the viewers who don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about what functional nutrition is?
Yeah, well, functional nutrition, I think, is rooted in functional medicine. I think it's just people who are functional nutritionists have different certifications than people who are functional medicine practitioners. I'm actually a functional medicine practitioner, but I'm also a clinical dietitian, so I just combine the two. So functional medicine basically looks at very simply the root cause of dysfunction in the body. It's compared against conventional medicine, where conventional medicine, um, doctors are typically treating symptoms of disease or managing symptoms of disease by using medications, um, especially chronic disease or chronic dysfunction. In functional medicine, we believe that if there is chronic dysfunction, whether it's disease or just constant daily symptoms that affect your quality of life, whether it's hormones or gut or brain function, that there's typically an underlying cause. And we kind of work like detectives to try to figure out what that cause is. And then we try to address the root cause so that instead of managing symptoms for the rest of your life, you eliminate the problem if and when possible.
And how do you get to the root cause? What kind of testing do you do? What kind of investigations do you do?
I think the most important thing is an initial consultation. I think that's the most important because you can have different people who present with different symptoms, but they develop the symptoms or their triggers for developing their symptoms are different. So, for example, someone who has bloating could have had taken antibiotics before that, and then antibiotics could have contributed to yeast overgrowth. So then their symptoms would imply that they have yeast overgrowth. Versus some people who have bloating could have a history of food poisoning, where the food poisoning could have triggered something called post infectious SIBO. So you basically do a very thorough history. I go through symptoms. I also think I do things a little bit differently because I studied or trained to see the body as a very interconnected network of symptoms, as because also functional medicine can mimic allopathic medicine or conventional medicine where they just go like, oh, you have gut issues, let's do a stool test and then treat you based on your test results. But really the body's in a system of interconnected networks. So I look at brain, digestion, sleep, mood, history, infections, and whatnot, and try to piece the pieces together. Once I have a clear idea, which to be honest, from my experience, I've been working in this field, specifically functional medicine, for about, I'd say, 11 years now. It's quite easy for me to figure out what's going on. And then we recommend the appropriate test because I also don't like to do four tests to try to figure out what the problem is. I try to like narrow it down to one test if possible. And then typically speaking, when you identify the root, you don't have to treat four things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You treat one major thing and then you see an improvement in that major thing. And then it has a downstream effect, and then you can go in and like nitpick.
And then typically, at least in our region, what are the usual culprits? What do you find is usually
I
the root cause?
I think stress and gut issues. And I was just speaking to a journalist about this actually. I feel like in our region, people have a lot more pressure because there's a massive social component.
Mm-hmm.
So not only are you concerned with what you're doing on a daily basis, like you're trying to hit, you're trying to eat well, you're trying to get to work, you're trying to take care of your kids or your family, you also have to adhere to social obligations.
Right.
So you have your family gatherings, you have your family, your husband or wife's family, you have your friends, there's a whole like social status is also dependent on how social you are, I think. So
Yeah.
and then on top of that, you have circadian disruption because your day doesn't end until 10 p.m.
Yeah.
So then you stay up until 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. to try to get that like alone time for yourself to decompress. So there's a circadian component. I do think our gut health is poor, especially because I have worked with just a wide variety of nationalities. And having worked in Dubai, that was my like initial introduction to functional medicine. I would work with a lot of expats and Westerners and people from all countries. And their stool test results were much better than like I remember when I came to Kuwait and started doing stool tests here, I was always surprised at the amount of stuff that would come up on a stool test. It was
Insane.
at least double like the amount of stuff that I would see previously. And it's very consistent, like consistently elevated markers in people's gut health. So I think stress is a component, circadian biology is a component, and then gut issues are a component.
But then there is an interplay between sleep and the gut.
Yes, it's not very direct. Like,
Okay.
it's not like if you have poor sleep, you will get bacterial overgrowth. It's not like that, but I think it's more related to the circadian biology. I mean, I think cellular health is gaining popularity now, but it's been a thing for a really long time. But your cells run on certain clocks, so they can't function if they're out of tune with the environment.
Okay, so that's an excellent segue then
Yeah.
to Ramadan,
Yeah.
because your entire day shifts, and
Hmm.
I feel like rather than doing it
In the ideal,
in the
optimal way
ideal
where you're
way.
sleeping early and waking up early and breaking
Exactly.
your fast. I know. I know. I've actually looked into this purely out of curiosity
Yeah.
because if you're looking at the science, ideally you stop eating when the sun sets and
Right.
your first meal should be when the sun rises.
Right.
Like not when the sun rises, but very early on during the day. And your largest meal should be early on in the day, and your smallest meal should be later on in the day. But to be honest, there's been a lot of studies on people's health during Ramadan, and they show a lot of improved markers. They show us. So I'm not really sure how that works, but I think there's something along this, something related to the autophagy component, which is when you fast for a certain amount of time, you get cellular cleanup. So,
Yeah.
like your damaged cells get eliminated, you keep the healthy cells. But also, it depends how you do it. There are so many people that gain weight during Ramadan, which I don't understand, like, to be honest, because they're gorging for
Yeah.
the 7 hours that they have access to food. And
Yeah.
then they're sleeping in as late as they can
Right.
to try to avoid feeling hungry. And obviously, you have the social component where people are just like staying up later and later and later. So I think it really depends on how you do it. You could definitely adhere to the principles. And then, I'm not to get into like the religious component, but I'm pretty sure the goal of Ramadan wasn't to stay up socializing, gorge on it's
And then sleep till it's
yeah,
futur time, and it
exactly.
defeats
Yeah.
the actual purpose.
Exactly. So there's probably I think if you were to do it well, where like you break your fast, like you finish eating 10 or 11 p.m. and have a long-term fast, it would be aligned.
In terms of suhoor, what do you
Hmm.
recommend? When should people be having it? Some people wake up in the middle of the night to have a last bite to eat and then go back to
Yeah,
sleep. Like,
it depends. A lot of my answers are it depends because we're not living in a vacuum either. There
yeah.
are people that have to get up at 8 a.m. to go to work and then they have a 12-hour day ahead of them. So of course for those people you're better off eating as close to the adhan as possible. But I think ideally you should have a limited eating window. So let's say I think fudur would be 5:30 as of now. It's around 5:30 p.m. Probably like 12, like a six
Yeah.
hour eating window, I
Yeah.
think, which is it's not actually extreme because it's only done for a month.
Okay.
So it should be fine.
Yeah. So I think the idea of intermittent fasting has been
Mhm.
popularized a lot in the
Mhm.
past couple of
Mhm.
years. And then I think I read a study that said actually long-term intermittent fasting is not the best for you, especially for
Yes,
women, I think. Can
especially
you
for
tell us more
women.
about that?
Yeah, men get away with a lot actually. Intermittent fasting is actually really good for men. And men have almost double the amount of calories that women have. Like if you compare a man and a woman of the same weight, let's just say they're of the same height and build and the same weight, men can get away with half the calorie intake that a woman can before their body starts getting into quote unquote starvation mode.
Okay.
Versus women, they get into quote unquote like starvation mode
Mm-hmm.
at surprisingly high calories. Like a girl who's around like let's say 70 kilos, her starvation calories would be 1700. It wouldn't be like 1200 or 1100. So limiting food That being said, intermittent fasting has benefits because a lot of people's health issues actually come from constantly grazing and constantly feeding. That puts pressure on your mitochondria,
Yeah.
which is your cells, because they're constantly having to process this food for energy, and you require periods of fasting, not just from a cellular perspective, even for gut health. A lot of people can develop things like SIBO because when you stop eating for 3 hours, your gut has this thing called the migrating motor complex where it comes in and it sweeps out all the food from the last meal that you ate. If you eat a snack 2 hours after your last meal, you're constantly disrupting this process. So you have all these like leftover food debris that's hanging out in your gut that then promotes bacterial overgrowth, for example. So fasting principles are important, but you can't overdo it because if you limit your calories too much, especially women, they can go into starvation mode. It can start affecting their menstrual cycle. It can start affecting their stress hormones. It can start affecting their metabolism. When you do go into starvation mode, you get something called metabolic adaptation,
Yeah.
which happens also with reduced calories. If you reduce your calories, either if you reduce your calories or you reduce your carbs or you cut your eating window to honestly more than 10 hours for women, your body slows down your metabolism
Right.
to match the food intake so that you're not in this massive deficit that's affecting your health.
That's insane because that completely debunks the whole idea, which I think 10 years ago they would say, you need to be snacking like every 2 hours to keep your
Yes,
metabolism up.
exactly.
And this is a
Yeah.
whole new science.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
frequent feedings are, for example, frequent protein feedings are good, but you can get 4 protein feedings a day with 3 to 4 hours in between.
the more you read into nutrition, the more you get caught in this catch 22. So if I
Yeah.
want to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
I need to be burning more than I'm consuming. So I
Mm-hmm.
need to be in a calorie deficit.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go and say too much of that
Mm-hmm.
gets you in starvation mode and your
Mm-hmm.
body starts holding on to fat.
Yeah.
If I was overweight and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
what do I do? What shall I do?
Well, that's
Weight training is one thing I know.
yes. I think the first thing you would have to accept is that if you were overweight as a result of constant overfeeding, you've pretty much damaged some machinery. And I find it really interesting when people that have maybe like not treated their bodies in the best way
Hmm.
get frustrated at the fact that they're not seeing results quickly. Like I said, if you're constantly overfeeding, you're literally damaging the cells that burn the fat that you're eating for energy. So I think first of all, accept you're kind of starting off at a disadvantage. Not for everyone. Some people like drop fat really fast,
Yeah.
but people and honestly, there's a lot more goes into it. Like if you have chronically high stress hormones, also when people are overweight, they start storing fat in the wrong places, like in between organs and stuff like that. So when that happens, it affects how you process carbs and how you process insulin. So to reverse something like that, you really do need patience, and I do think that's where people get really frustrated. And that's why people jump between one school of thought to another because they're like, well, this isn't working. They said I have to do a calorie. I'm actually in like an online training group, and I see the group chat, and there's so many women that are like, I'm sticking to a calorie deficit and I'm not seeing any results. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm just like, you just need to be patient. Like, you don't jump into intermittent fasting and then jump into that.
Yeah.
So and then also people underestimate how much of a calorie deficit they need to be in. It's actually quite complicated because also if let's say you have a history of dieting, a lot of people do. A lot of people
Yeah.
who are overweight do because they get frustrated about their weight and then they cut calories in order to lose weight really fast, and then they can't maintain the calorie deficit because they do like an intense cut because they're like, okay, I'm gonna like do this cut because I have this event coming up and blah blah blah, and then you cannot maintain the deficit.
Yeah.
So then they go back to eating whatever they were eating, and then they try again, and they doing that repeatedly causes something called metabolic, it's the same thing, causes metabolic adaptation, aka metabolic damage, aka a slow metabolism. These are all legitimate things. So there are people that come in, they're literally eating 1200 calories and they're not losing weight because you've dieted so much historically that your body like knows exactly what to do when you drop the calories down to 1200. It knows exactly how to survive to give you energy to do your workout and hit your 10K steps. You know what I mean? So a
Yeah.
lot of these people that are like, I'm doing everything, I'm training, I'm doing my cardio, I'm hitting my 10K steps, I'm counting my calories, typically have some kind of metabolic damage. So I can't give you straight answer because someone's metabolism is at 1400, someone's metabolism is at 1200. And I think where people go wrong is they use these equations online
Yeah.
where you put your height and your weight. So like height, weight, activity level, and then it tells you you need to eat 2,300 calories to be in a calorie deficit, but you're eating 1,600 and you're not losing weight.
Yeah.
So instead of going and eating 2,300 calories, you realize, okay, I'm eating 1,600. I'm supposed to be eating 1,300. That means my metabolism is so far off. And something like that requires kind of like rebuilding the signaling almost at a cellular level. You should be able to process carbs efficiently. So you might have to reduce carbs. You have to do some kind of like reverse dieting to build your metabolism back up. So
What's reverse dieting?
reverse dieting is starting off. Let's say you're supposed to be losing weight at 1,800, but you're eating 1,400 and you're not losing weight. You have to build your calories up slowly to 1,800. And this is the key. You have to expect that while your food goes up, your weight doesn't change. You're not going to be losing weight, but you're going to be tracking all these foods because what you're doing is you're building your metabolism back up. So
Okay.
every time you increase your food intake and your metabolism goes up, your weight stays the same. That means it's worked.
But you couple it with a training program so
Well,
that
yeah,
you're not
strength training is
gaining.
really important.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely strength training is really important. I would say strength training and steps. I don't think people should go to
Hit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or cardio.
Yeah.
So to be honest, weight loss, I do think it's complicated. You have different schools of thoughts where, people who are like strictly nutritionists will say it's calories in, calories out, and that's all that matters. Okay, but do you know how many things control how much you burn calories, like how well you burn calories?
Yeah.
Do you know like if your cells are dysfunctional, you're not going to burn that many calories. If you have insulin resistance, you're not going to effectively burn the calories that you get from carbs. If you're constantly stressed out, actually you're gonna gain belly fat and lose muscle. Like if you cut down,
Yeah.
that's just what cortisol does. It
Yeah.
makes you lose muscle in your peripherals, so your arms and your legs, but then you have a little belly.
Yeah.
That's why, like I'm always like, you really should work with a professional because if you're like I said, a lot of people like do a diet, lose weight, their body's responsive. But if you're at a point where you're trying everything and it's not working, it's it's a consequence of the choices that you've made for the last 5 years or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Then what kind of training or in what kind of state do you recommend in Ramadan to be training? So do we train in a fasted state?
No, definitely, especially for women. Like I said, men can get away with it. They've done these studies. Men are
Yeah.
fine. So, women should train in a fed state because you have to signal abundance to your cells. You cannot signal scarcity and starvation.
Mhm.
So, ideally, you would train after futur. If you're one of these people like I can't train on a full stomach, you would have a meal that includes 30 grams of carbs, at least 30 grams of carbs and 15 grams of protein. And then your post workout should include minimum 30 grams of carbs and 30 grams of protein. So definitely for women, train in in a fed state, and that will actually support fat loss because when you're signaling abundance to your cells, that's when they work effectively.
So what happens to our gut health when fasting?
Fasting is really great for gut health because there are certain microbes in your gut that thrive when they're in a fasted state, and there are certain microbes in your gut that thrive when you're in a fed state. And you know that for optimal gut health, we need something called microbial diversity.
Mhm.
So we need a variety of bacteria. I say this a lot, but people think that gut health relies on having all kinds of healthy bacteria, but it's not. You need a really good ecosystem and microbial environment. So that relies on variety and diversity. And one of the things that promotes microbial diversity is fasted state, fed state. So you get much better diversity. I know we touched up on the issue of like constantly grazing affecting gut health. So people should be aware of that because I do think people try to maximize the amount of food that they eat during the fed
Yeah.
window. But even in Ramadan, like the best thing is to at least have 2 to 3 hours before meals. And I think people can. Like I actually get surprised when people say I can't eat 3 meals a day. I'm like, yes, you can. You eat at futur and then 3 hours later, if you're not grazing, you'll be hungry for a second meal. And then three
Yeah.
hours later, that's your dinner or your suhoor.
So you recommend having 3 meals even in Ramadan?
Yeah,
I
I
think
do.
most people have
Yeah.
2 just massive ones.
Well, yes, exactly. But it also depends on your goals. If you're trying to maximize muscle gain, yes, of course, because you need to get your protein in because protein and resistance training is one of the things that prevents muscle breakdown during a calorie deficit or
Mhm.
during a fast. if you're eating 2 big meals per day, yes, you can hit your protein intake, but I think for women especially, it's more difficult because it's hard for us to eat like a 300-gram steak.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be eating 300-gram steak for suhoor, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? So typically what I actually recommend, like my meal plans are, and I do have Ramadan meal plans that lay this out, are a main meal, and then you can do like a smoothie in the middle, which has a sufficient amount of
Yeah.
protein, and then you do like another big meal or decent sized meal at suhoor.
Moving on to uh, mental health.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I've just been fascinated with
Yeah.
how the gut brain kind of connection.
Yeah.
What are the functional causes on mental health issues in your opinion?
That's a good question. You know, when I first started working here, like parts of my health questionnaire would be, do you have any issues with anxiety or depression? People were really surprised, especially I think in Kuwait, because nobody asks that.
Yeah.
For a while, people were really surprised. Like, oh, like you're the first person to ask about my mental health. Or like, what does that have to do with anything? I'm trying to lose weight. Or what does that have to do with anything? I'm just bloated.
Yeah.
The reason I ask about it is because there are a lot of functional causes for anxiety and depression, issues like brain fog as well, issues with focus and concentration. And I think it's important to discuss this because without awareness that, hey, there could be a physical reason for why I'm feeling like this, you think it's all in the mind. And then you start blaming yourself. Like, why, why am I getting anxious at this? It's not a big deal. Like,
Hmm.
why are none of my friends experiencing the same type of anxiety about this situation? Why am I so down? Everything is going really well in my life. Why can't I be positive? Why can't I be more grateful? Like I have so much to be thankful for, but I feel horrible every day. That's because there are physical things that cause these all of these same symptoms. So let's split it into anxiety and depression.
Okay.
Anxiety really is like kind of overactivity in the brain. One of the main things that happens is you have something called glutamate and GABA. So glutamate is a brain hormone and GABA is a brain hormone.
Hmm.
Glutamate is this like excitatory brain hormone and GABA is this like calming brain hormone. If you have gut issues, the toxins from the gut can leak through the gut into the blood, and they can increase glutamate and reduce GABA. So then you have this chronic anxiety because you're just constantly wired and irritable and on edge. If women don't have enough progesterone, progesterone breaks down and gets metabolized in the liver into two types of progesterone. One of the types of progesterone increases GABA, which is the calming hormone.
Yeah.
So a lot of women actually experience anxiety as they get older, even in their 30s, because they're slowly losing progesterone, which means they're losing this progesterone metabolite, which means they're losing GABA, which means they're losing like the brakes that they usually would have on stress. So then imagine like you're all gas, no brakes. There's nothing to kind of like calm you down. And one of the
Yeah.
main symptoms is sleep disruption, actually, because progesterone, because of its calming effects, helps you sleep. So a lot of women, like as they age 30s, 40s, they'll start getting difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep. Another major cause of anxiety, which I think is also really important to highlight because people talk about cortisol a lot and everybody thinks cortisol is bad. Cortisol isn't bad if it's produced at the right times of day and the right amounts. So we need cortisol to be high during the day because
Hmm.
that's what gets you out of bed. It's called a cortisol awakening response.
Right.
It's a natural, healthy response to like sunlight and, just your circadian rhythm. And then we need it to be low during the day. If cortisol stays elevated throughout the day, which can happen from something called allostatic load, I'm going to try not to be technical, but it can happen from something called allostatic load where you go through like either like one big traumatic event or you go through um, a period of chronic stress. So let's say like you have like a really intense project and you're just like pummeling yourself at work for like a few months, or you go through a series of like small stressful events.
Hmm.
You're not giving your body a chance to like recalibrate
Yeah.
after stress. Because if your body recalibrates after stress, that's actually good for you. It's a hormetic response. It
Yeah.
means you get a little bit of stress and then you develop resilience to counteract that stress. It's good for you. Makes you more resilient. But if you have no space to recover after each stressful event, your baseline of stress goes up like 2 to 3 notches.
Yeah.
So you wake up in a heightened stress response. And what that looks like on a test is high cortisol all throughout the day, because your body's producing a certain amount of cortisol that's not supposed to be there.
Hmm.
That's really common in people who experience kind of like anxiety throughout the day, but also like when it's time for them to wind down and like relax and fall asleep, they can't switch off because the cortisol isn't dropping.
Yeah.
So that's where cortisol is bad, where it's high in the evening. I'm gonna link that to depression, where they've done lots of studies. Actually, it's funny. I just posted this, and I hope I don't get any backlash, but I tend to get backlash whenever I give functional causes for things that have a medical treatment, like a
Yeah.
medication. But there are so many studies on treatment resistant depression, which is basically someone is on medication, it's not fixing it because you're taking a pill for serotonin when the problem is a cortisol issue. Does
Yeah.
nothing. What's serotonin going to do to cortisol? Nothing.
Yeah.
So, low cortisol, there are multiple pathways for this, but like I said, you need cortisol in the morning to get out of bed, be energetic, excited. Low cortisol, you don't get those feelings. So, what are you left with?
Mm-hmm.
You're left with wanting to stay in bed, dragging yourself out of bed, having no excitement for the day. Nothing is like really triggering you, like nothing is exciting you because you don't have that healthy stress response. Because
Can we link that to ADHD? Because you do have a motivational
yes, that's more
issue.
dopamine.
Okay.
ADHD is more dopamine. I think low cortisol is different to having dopamine issues. Low cortisol is you feel quite flat, like you're
Okay.
flat. Your apathy is a really big symptom of low cortisol, which is um somebody could be crying in front of you and you just don't care. Like you could just like walk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a really big symptom of low
And
cortisol.
how do you treat that?
Herbs that build cortisol, but you have to test because your cortisol curve you could have four different types of HPA axis dysfunction. So you could have chronically high cortisol, which is stage one, which is actually really good, really easy to treat,
Mm-hmm.
very responsive. You could have basically low cortisol in the morning and high cortisol at night, or you could have low cortisol in the morning, low cortisol at night, which is
Okay.
not good because then you're kind of there's no kind of variation in your rhythm. That's when you just like feel flat, like you're exhausted all day, but you can't fall asleep because you don't have it's called a diurnal rhythm, which is
Yes.
like a 2 point rhythm, like something goes up and something
Yeah.
drops down. And you just like like you take all your vitamins and they don't do
Can
anything to
you
help.
relate this to the kinds of stress that we face today than we did back in the day? So usually you have
Yeah,
this like a stress, like a stressor. Let's say you're running away from, I don't know,
yeah,
a
yeah,
tiger
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
eat you.
yeah,
And then the exertion, right? The
yeah.
running away releases the cortisol,
Yes,
where at
yeah,
the moment it's kind of work related stress
yeah,
where unless you're
exactly.
going to the gym, you never get that
Yeah,
out of your system. So
exactly.
does
Yeah.
working out kind of help?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do think that working out helped. I think if I mean I mean now we're getting more into like
Okay.
nervous system regulation and
Okay.
stuff like that because if you look at animals in the wild, like when they are running from something and they escape the danger, they just kind of like start twitching and tremoring like just to eliminate all those little like hormones of stress, but I don't know how humans are supposed to do it in the wild. I don't know if people just like drop in the wild and start twitching uncontrollably. But there are things like trauma release exercises and stuff like that to help support the elimination of like traumatic responses through the body. But yes, I think exercise does help, but it doesn't override the stress system. If you're in an environment that's constantly triggering you, honestly, it's very difficult to recover. But you can take supplements which at least physiologically, let's say like lower cortisol in the right times of day. And then if you lower cortisol in the right times of day, you're at least the stressor is not affecting you the way
Hmm.
that it was before, if that makes sense. Because you don't have that like overactive response to it.
And in relation to, you were talking about progesterone in women.
Hmm.
Um, do you recommend then hormone treatments?
Yeah, I really do recommend. I'm on bioidentical progesterone and I
Okay.
love it. Because
Is it
I
in pill
had,
form?
yeah,
Okay.
oral.
Okay.
A lot of people also like take not they don't not a lot of people, but you have people like Barbara O'Neill that's like take wild yam cream
Yeah.
because it has progesterone and do this and that. You need progesterone to be broken down in the liver to get the metabolite of progesterone that gives you GABA or the calming response. So transdermal, which is cream progesterone, won't have the same effect. It might like benefit you in terms of your cycle, but it won't have the same effect on a calming response. But not everybody needs hormone replacement. And if you do hormone replacement, make sure it's bioidentical. A lot of women respond to supplements as well because there are supplements that help strengthen something called an HPO axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. So it's basically the connection between your brain and your ovaries.
Hmm.
So when it strengthens it, then your brain can communicate to your ovaries to produce better levels of hormones.
Is there a natural way to get it in food
Yeah.
form?
No,
Okay.
no, because this herbs need to be concentrated. You'd have to eat a lot of.
Okay.
Yeah, I know people do seed cycling, but
Yeah.
I can see the impact of that, but I see people that are like they're very depleted. So I think like seed cycling is good if you generally want to maintain like the health, but if you're like under chronic stress, which depletes progesterone, I don't think seed cycling is impactful enough
Okay.
personally. Yeah, I think it can help, but I don't think it's impactful enough.
Okay, moving on to, we talked about female hormones and hormone metabolism.
Hmm.
Why and how does it differ from person to person?
Good question. That's a really good question. So we do something called a Dutch test. A Dutch test stands for dried urinary. I forgot.
Something or the other.
Yeah. A Dutch test is a dried urine hormone. So basically you pee on a filtered paper and you leave it out to dry and you do that 4 times a day. And with those pieces of data, we can map out your cortisol curve, which we were just talking about.
Okay.
But we can also map out how your body is metabolizing these hormones in the liver. Okay. So you could have two people that have the same level of estrogen in the blood. They go to a gynecologist, they do a blood test. Both of them are in the normal range. Both of them have the same level of estrogen. One woman has symptoms of high estrogen, even though her blood test results are normal. Another woman has symptoms of high estrogen, even though her blood test results are normal. One of these women could break down estrogen down one pathway because estrogen breaks down in 3 pathways. I want to simplify this and I really want people to grasp this because it's really, really, really important.
Okay.
Estrogen gets produced for your cycle, and then your body uses it for whatever
Hmm.
it needs to, and then it goes into your liver, and then your liver breaks it down as a step towards eliminating it because it's used it, it's done. So your liver breaks it down and it breaks it down into 3 pathways. You have a really good pathway, protective. You have a very bad pathway, which is where like it can be like cancerous or whatnot, like oxidative damage, DNA damage to the cells. Or you could have a growth pathway, which is not particularly dangerous, but it can give you symptoms of high estrogen, like tender breasts, heavy periods, painful periods, water retention, feeling puffy, having anxiety, really bad PMS. These are all symptoms of strong estrogen.
Okay.
And then once your body chooses like bad pathway, good pathway, growth
Troublesome.
pathway.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Growth pathway. Then it goes into a second stage. In that second stage, your body's supposed to methylate to further eliminate the estrogen. So it's like a two-step process.
Okay.
Differs from person to person because I could metabolize estrogen down a really good pathway, but then my second step, which is my methylation, isn't working, which is actually what my test results showed. So I treat that. How do I treat that? I support methylation. I don't support estrogen
But
elimination.
what's the root cause of that? What defines?
Genetics. So we actually also do like a DNA test. It's called DNA estrogen. And your genetics determine which pathways goes into it, but also your exposure to environmental toxins. So plastics push the growth pathway. So if
Mhm.
you're constantly drinking water from plastic bottles, which is one of the things that we recently changed in our house, yeah, honestly, plastics has been really difficult for me because we rely on convenience here
Oh,
so
yeah.
much, which again I do think comes back to like how people like feel like they have to do 20 things a day to just like keep up with everyone else.
Yeah.
Plastics push it down. Environmental toxins push it down the 4OH pathway, which is the dangerous pathway.
Mhm.
Oxidative stress. So basically, oxidative stress is again environmental toxins like the pollution, circadian disruption, lack of hydration, lack of cellular, like it affects your cellular function.
What helps push it in the right pathway? So what can people do?
So certain herbs push it in the right pathway, eliminating environmental toxins, push it in the right pathway. Some people, if that's your genetics, you pretty much have to stay on herbs that push it down the right pathway for
Okay.
forever. So if people have a genetic mutation where they don't methylate properly, you need methylated B vitamins. You just cannot methylate. So then
Okay.
the B vitamins can't do their jobs. They're used as cofactors to, let's say, keys to keep the machine turning.
Mhm.
So then if your body's not making it, you have to get it from an external source. So I think
Okay.
DNA testing is important. Ideally, you would do a Dutch to see how is your environment affecting it, and then you do a DNA to see, well, is it really my environment or am I genetically susceptible to this? So I have to support my like poor genetics, if that makes sense.
Would you recommend everyone doing these kinds of
Everyone,
tests just to investigate, or are there
everyone.
symptoms that you need to look out for before you?
I legitimately, truly think everyone should do it. I do a stool test once a year.
Okay.
Because why do I do that? Because sometimes you have gut issues, but it doesn't show up as bloating. It doesn't show up as issues with your
Mhm.
bowel movements. It shows up in your mental health.
Yeah.
You're inflamed, but you don't really know it. So then you have this like chronic low level inflammation. And then I only started doing the Dutch test recently. I actually did one last year. This is why I think everyone should do it. When I did the Dutch test, I had no idea. And this is me, a clinician. I know all the symptoms. I had no idea that I was in very close to that end stage of low cortisol.
Do local labs do it, or you have to send it
No,
abroad?
yeah, we send it abroad.
Okay.
We have the labs. We actually send it, we ship it internationally. So like anyone who's interested, we literally just like take their address, send it to them, they get the results, we do an analysis. Because the lab that we work with, they're based in the Netherlands, but they're the ones that ship the test kits and organize the return for the test
Okay.
kits. So like anyone can get it. But yeah, I knew all the symptoms and I thought I was in like stage 1 where my cortisol was really high. I was in stage 3. Stage 3 means my body has already gone through all the damaging effects of cortisol. Not for months, for years, because it doesn't happen that fast.
Wow.
Yeah, because you have different things that impact your function. So you could be in like a depleted cortisol state, but because you've gone through, let's say, traumatic experience or like chronic stress or anxiety or whatnot, you get brain changes. So like certain parts of your brain grow, which kind of make you like hyper alert and hyperactive and like constantly scanning for threats. And that looks like you have a lot of energy, but it's not energy. You're just kind of like
Alert.
alert,
Mm.
yeah. So that was me. And then you have certain parts of your brain that shrink, which contribute to the low cortisol. So if I hadn't tested, I wouldn't have known. I would have supplemented for high cortisol. If I hadn't tested, I would have supplement based on my symptoms. I would have been like, oh, I have high cortisol. I need to reduce it.
And you were able to tell that through the Dutch
Yeah.
test? Insane.
Yeah, I know. I know. Like knowledge is power.
I wanna go back to ADHD because
Okay.
I feel like every other person I know is self-diagnosed with
Yeah.
ADHD. Um, what's the is there a functional aspect to that?
Mm-hmm.
I know
Yeah.
there's a
Like a
genetic.
genetic,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a really big genetic component. The genetic component is also related to how your body, like whether you're able to produce enough dopamine, how you process dopamine. There are certain parts of the brain, again, that don't communicate effectively in people with ADHD. So you have something like task initiation, which I personally
Yeah,
really struggle with. I don't know if you're the same
I
or
am.
if you know people who are the same, but it's basically you know what you need to do. You know exactly what you need to do, but you for the life of you cannot initiate the
Unless you're
task.
stressed. Unless
Exactly,
there's like
unless
it's
you're
due
yes,
tomorrow
exactly,
and it's
exactly.
like, yeah.
Yeah. So that's impacted by like certain brain regions, like just not getting enough uh stimulation. So like
Mhm.
one part is getting a lot of stimulation, like you've collected all the info, you because dopamine is involved in ADHD, like dopamine is the pleasure of pursuit.
Yeah.
So you enjoy the process of figuring things out, but then when you figure them out, you don't
You
want to
can't
do
get it
it.
done.
Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely a genetic component, but then there's a functional component as well, because if you have gut issues or if you have gut issues, it affects again the glutamate and GABA. So then you have this like hyper excitability, but like not enough of the calmness to actually like sit down and like get work done.
Mhm.
If you have certain gut infections, they actually like candida, they actually affect the conversion of dopamine to norepinephrine. So you
Mhm.
actually have like too much dopamine, but not enough epinephrine, norepinephrine. So then again, norepinephrine is required for like drive, motivation, like
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Those are
And
functional factors?
yeah, those are functional factors. You can test for
Okay.
those as well. We actually have a different test called an organic acids test that
Okay.
looks at that. And then anyone that comes to me with ADHD, I actually do the organic acids test because they show the byproducts that contribute to these issues, and they show the balance of brain hormones in your body. And then you have things like inflammation, whether the inflammation is coming from the gut or
Mhm.
overall inflammation. It affects like the immune and inflammatory component in your brain. So you have like these activated things called microglia, which are like your immune cells in your brain. And when they're activated, you can get all kinds of symptoms. You can get brain fog, difficulty focusing, difficulty concentrating, which of course lends itself to symptoms of ADHD. But to be honest, to be completely honest, I think a really big component is also incessant scrolling and how our like attention span has gone from
Yeah.
watching 2-hour movies to watching 30-second videos on Instagram
Right.
that really hijacks your dopamine system, whether or not you have ADHD, whether or not you have the genetic predisposition. But it really, really hijacks your dopamine system.
You think some people appear to have ADHD when they don't actually because of these lifestyle factors? Is that what you mean?
I think people self-diagnose when it's a lifestyle factor.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think actually a lot of people self-diagnose because they can't concentrate, which is not actually the only symptom of ADHD. Like
Yeah.
ADHD, most people, I think most people with ADHD who are neurodivergent, you'll find that they're quite smart in ways that the average person isn't.
Yeah.
This has been my experience, not just with myself, but so many of my colleagues in this field are actually ADHD, but you'll see them kind of like fumble a lot of things, but then they're like
Hyper
incredible.
focus on a field of interest and then just
Yeah, but also the way the brain works is different. Like for me, like I have really good pattern recognition, which makes me excellent at diagnostics. I can figure out what's wrong with you with before I go through the logical process. I've noticed this very early on in my
that's
career.
so true though.
Yeah,
Pattern recognition.
yes,
I never
yeah.
thought about.
Before I go through the logical process, before I ask all the detailed questions, I don't go like, oh, she said this and then she said this and then she said this, she might have this. I'm literally talking to patients and then I'll be like,
You see it.
she has this. And it's because my brain has already like mapped out all the connections. And then of course I go in and I investigate with testing and whatnot. Yeah, we're really quick learners. We do have like that hyper focus component. We're driven by, like novelty and learning.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I love learning new things. I
Yeah.
love it. It's like, it's like I can assume what is the equivalent of like a drug to some people. Like
Yeah.
I just want more and more and more.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, and through your practice, so through a
Functional
functional
medicine, yeah,
medicine, do you
lens.
see that there is improvement?
Yes, 100%. I see it all the time. I told you I have people that come to me because they're concerned with ADHD. We run the test. Almost every single person has something that is contributing to the worsening of their ADHD.
And is it usually supplementation or is it food or is it lifestyle? What?
It's supplementation, but it's also food because you
Okay.
can't if you have like gut issues and leaky gut, you can react to the proteins in food. You can react to the proteins in gluten, proteins in dairy,
Okay, so I
and
think we've
supplements.
spoken a lot, and it's a lot of information, and
I
it's
know, I'm
for
trying
yeah,
to,
no,
yeah.
that's I mean for a regular Joe, it might be a lot to take in and
Yeah.
actually make use of this information. So
Yes,
how
good
would you break
point.
it down to someone who's listening to us? What do they
Yes.
need to do? Like, give me
Um,
a toolkit for
okay.
dummies.
Okay. I'm gonna be honest with you. If I was less knowledgeable, I would be able to give you a really clear toolkit. But
Yeah.
because I understand that there are like multiple causes, I the main thing I would say is knowledge is power. I think testing is really important.
Hmm.
I'm a really big believer in diagnostics. You can't, how can you treat something if you don't know where it's coming from?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to spend 6 months taking supplements that you heard are good for brain focus and attention, and you're not really going to get anywhere. So I think testing is really important. Working with a practitioner is really important. I think there are probably three things that can be incredibly impactful to everyone because for if we're also looking at it through a cellular medicine lens, which I think is ultimately where all of these dysfunctions
Right.
happen. Circadian biology is super important. Turn off all artificial, especially overhead lights, 2 to 3 hours before bed. Everything. If you want, you can have floor lamps and make sure they're amber.
What difference does a floor lamp have to?
Well, think about it from an evolutionary perspective. If light is above your eyes, it's
It's
daytime.
daytime. Insane.
If your light is below your eye level, it's
Right.
sunset. It's
Right.
it's you're winding down.
I love that.
Sunlight has different wavelengths throughout the day. So
Hmm.
your brain has evolved to understand that this level of this number of wavelength is sunrise, this wavelength is noon, this wavelength is sunset,
Right.
and now it's evening, like before bed. So if you're blasting artificial lights, even if it's a floor lamp, but it's white light, like full of blue light, you're getting the wrong signal.
Right.
I have said this before. I'm always going to repeat this piece of information. A lot of people think that our health issues developed when agricultural changes happened.
Yeah.
But at the same time that agricultural changes happened, people started using artificial lights.
Hmm.
So we're getting kind of all these different, like all these like wrong
Signals.
signals into our bodies about when certain genes work, when certain genes switch off, because your genes switch on and off based on your light exposure.
Mhm.
So number one thing I would say, switch off artificial lights, especially overheads. Get amber lights,
Mhm.
so lights that are free of blue and ideally green lights, and then ideally wake up at sunrise and expose your eyes to the light outside, even if you're not directly looking at the sun. At the very least, when you do wake up, go outside.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just get sunlight through a window. At the very least, that will program your cells to function the way that they're supposed to function. So that's disease prevention, and then eat locally and eat seasonally.
Mm-hmm.
Super important. Again, your cells, if your genetics are that of a nomad, or like uh, you know the way that we used to like live in tents and
Yeah.
walk around the deserts, and we'd have dates to keep us sustained. Why are you eating a pineapple that grows somewhere in Asia at a
Yeah.
different in a completely different environment as your dessert for the day? So eating seasonally and locally is super
Does that
important.
work for expats?
I've actually thought about this very thing, by the way, because I was like, well, what if like what if I like migrate somewhere?
Yeah.
Do I eat
What do
according
you
to
do
their?
then?
I think at the very least eat seasonally. So
Yeah.
like at least like according to the seasonal
Yeah.
changes. So you're not eating a summer fruit in the middle of
Right.
winter. I can delve into that. I can delve into that, but I know I'm already dumping a lot of information, but there is some, like, we have two different types of metabolisms. We have a summer metabolism and a winter metabolism. So winter metabolism is fasting, food restriction, carb restriction, cold exposure, being a little bit more sedentary, hibernating a little bit. Summer is more abundance. So winter is scarcity, summer is more of an abundance
Yeah.
metabolism. So you're eating carbs, you're eating fruits, you're getting a ton of sunlight, you're moving around, you're swimming, like all of these kinds of things. And people want to have this endless summer all throughout the year,
Yeah.
and you just can't.
I find it quite, that is a fact. Kuwait makes you feel quite the opposite
Yeah.
because we have beautiful weather in the winter, and
Yeah.
it's when you can be outdoors,
Yes.
you
Interesting.
can move a little bit
Yeah. Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And in the summer, it's
Yeah.
too hot and you're just stuck indoors and you kind of don't, you
It's
feel
true.
restricted.
Yeah.
And I think that's the
There's
kind of,
a
yeah,
mismatch there.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Super interesting. As we close, what's the biggest misconception that
Mhm.
people have about healthy eating, you think?
I think the biggest misconception is that anything with protein is healthy for you, when pretty much anything with protein is completely processed
Yeah.
and covered with additives to make it palatable for you to eat more protein. Legitimately, I know I could give you a much more scientific answer, but this is what I see. People eat protein cookies, protein ice cream, protein snacks, protein chips. Take a look at the ingredients. What are you eating?
Yeah.
Like blended corn and oil, and you know what I mean, and milk,
Yeah.
solidified like milk solids. Like that's probably the biggest misconception. I think that is the biggest misconception, because I actually think when it comes to healthy eating, everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to eat. I think also maybe the second one is the seasonal.
Yeah.
For example, you think eating fruits all year round is good for you because it's giving you fiber. You're not supposed to be eating that many fruits in winter, for example.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's super
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like seasonal and local. What fruit grows
In the winter.
in the winter? What carbs grows in the ground when the ground is frozen from
Yeah.
the cold?
I think we're so out of
We're
touch.
so out of touch with
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even I will even say, like, functional medicine is a means to manage the disconnect that we have from nature. It's still not complete root cause. Complete root cause is living according to the laws of nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's a piece of advice that you would give people in terms of these habits for Ramadan in specific, since we're getting into the month?
I would say truly focus on body composition, focus on maintaining muscle mass, utilize the fact that you're fasting to reduce body fat if you have excess body fat. Those two things are really key for longevity and health. I would say absolutely do not try to make up and maximize your food just because you're fasting and you're trying to make sure you don't get hungry. You can feel a little bit hungry, like that's part
Mm-hmm.
of the process. I would say if you're going to have dessert, have it immediately after the meal
Yeah.
to maintain your blood sugar, because dessert is a really big component, I
Yeah.
think, of our food here. Hydrate with trace minerals. I think people overdo electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you're drinking probably 8 cups of water spread throughout. Obviously, depends person to person. Like maybe like 6 to 10 cups, I would say, spread throughout. Don't drink water all in one go because you're just going to pee it out.
Mm.
You know, people like chug water
Yeah.
before al-adhan. Uh, like sip on it throughout the day. And if you want to maintain muscle, you can not break your fast, but as soon as you break your fast with the dates and the water, you can drink essential amino acids that helps blunt the muscle breakdown response. If you're a woman, train in a fed state. If you're a man, you can train in a fasted state. Make sure you're hitting 3 to 4 strength training sessions a week to offset the calorie deficits,
Okay.
because that's one of the things that also maintains muscle, even if you're not eating enough. I think these are my main tips. I think if people abide by that, they will have a healthy Ramadan. Like space between meals, dessert after meals, protein 3 times a day. Yeah, I would say also don't sleep in because you're,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and finally, if you were to recommend that people start to work with a functional nutritionist,
Mhm.
where should they start?
I would say do your research. Look at honestly research, word of mouth. I think different practitioners have different methods. So look at someone that has experience in the goals that you want. So if you have someone that if you want to lose weight and work on your gut, work with someone who has experience in that. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then just reach out and book an appointment. I like to like whoever the practitioner is. I think people there's a ton of information overload that people think they can do it themselves, but really they just end up wasting months and
Yeah.
years trying to figure out a solution to a problem that requires a professional to look at it from like a bird's eye view.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you,
You're
Lulu. This
welcome.
was
My
super
pleasure.
interesting.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.